Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Medieval Academy from Blue Cocker Games. This game is all about being a squire and wanting to be a knight. So in order to do that, you need to do all these different squirely things and training in order to become a brave and powerful knight for King Arthur. You need to help the king. You need to win the hand of the fair maiden. You need to go into combat training, jousting training. You need to help the poor. You need to get an education, and somehow or another they rope you into fighting a dragon. Now, mechanically speaking, this all boils down to card drafting. This is a very light card drafting game. The cards that you draft are sort of your learning cards, that's actually what they're called, that are going to get you forward on all these different tracks on the board, representing all of those knightly skills I just described. So let's go ahead and take a brief look at how the game is played, then I'm going to come back and I'll let you know if it's worth your time. Okay, I'm going to give you a brief overview of Medieval Academy. This is a competitive game for 2 to 5 players. The goal is to go from being a squire to being a brave and powerful knight, knighted by King Arthur himself. Now, gameplay-wise, this is a card drafting game. Each player is going to start with a hand of 5 of these, what they're called learning cards, which are the essentials that you need as a squire in order to become a powerful knight. And you're trying to use these cards to vie for control of all these different boards here. These different boards are sort of symbolize the different aspects of knightly life that a squire should be better at. So first you have gallantry. So there's like a princess in a tower with her adorable Cocker Spaniel puppy who you're trying to win the heart of. You have combat training, jousting, education, winning the respect of the king, fighting a dragon potentially, which seems way out of whack with the rest of this, and helping the poor, giving to the impoverished. So each player is going to have a little scoring marker of their color on each of these tracks. You'll all start off at 0 at the beginning, and then you're just going to draft. So you have a little round marker here. The game will last for 6 rounds, and one player will be the start player. That's what the sword token is for, and that will change every round. And every round you're going to draft either clockwise or counterclockwise, and that'll alternate depending on what round it is. You'll start with a hand of the 5 learning cards, and then you'll draft. Now, each of the learning cards is keyed in to each of the different boards, and they all go from, there's 2 of each card from numbers 1 through 4, and then there's 1 5 for every number in the deck. So, for instance, just to show you some of these, here you have the gallantry card, and it's funny because as the numbers get higher, the brave or the noble action that the kid in the artwork takes gets better and better. So in this one he has a rose, but in the number 2 card he just has a pitiful little daisy, and the dog is peeing on his shoes or something. And if he goes up to 4 or 5, he's got a whole bouquet of roses, and maybe he's singing with a mandolin or something like that. So that's for the gallantry board. And then here's the king board, where again, here he just has a little cup of wine, but he might be a jester in one of the earlier cards. Here's for combat training. So right now he just has a crappy sword, a wooden sword and shield, but he might have a bigger and better suit of armor later on. Here's for education. There's an example of one of those cards. Fighting the dragon. And finally, helping the poor. So in this one, he's handing a bunch of change. If it was the number 1 card, he might just be flicking a single coin in and not really caring. In any event, each of these cards has that number value because first you're going to do the draft. Every player will draft until they have a new hand of 5 cards. Then, going back in the turn order, each player plays one of their cards, and you're going to do that in turn order. So I'll play a card, then the next player plays a card. You'll actually take one of those 5 cards that you drafted and either place it in front of you or directly into the discard pile, either way. And whatever card you played, keyed into whatever board that card was keyed into, you will move your marker up that number of spaces. So if I was the black player and I played a number 4 card for the education board, I would move up 4 spots on that board. And so on. You're going to keep doing that until everyone has figured out what spot they are on each board. Now, a couple of little tricks here. First and foremost, before you get to the final scoring at the end of each round, whoever lands on, whenever there's a tie, let's say for instance multiple people are on the same spot, whoever is on top of the stack breaks the tie, and then it goes down for there. So if these 3 people were on the same spot green, yellow, and black in that order. Green would be in first place, then yellow, then black. The other trick here is that you score the gallantry board, the fighting board, the jousting board, the education board at the end of every round of play, and then at the end of every third round of play, and then also for the king board, those markers all reset back to 0. The king board only gets scored every third at the end of the third round and the sixth round, and the dragon and the poverty board only get scored at the very end of the game at the end of the sixth round. Now, how does all this scoring work? The gallantry board works way different than all the other ones. You never score points for the gallantry board. Instead, depending on the place of the players and how many players are in the game, you will have the opportunity to move other discs up. So if you come, let's say the black came in first place here, then we had yellow, then we had green. Let's say it's at least a 4 or 5 player game. So that is how we are at the end of a round. Black is in the lead. Black gets, there's little reminders here, by the way, but black gets to move, once you get to scoring and figure out who's first, black gets to move one disc on one other board 3 spots. Then, well, actually you do this in reverse order. So green is in third place, and if there's no third place in a 3-player game or less. But so starting with, like, let's say the green player here, the green player gets to move one of his discs on one other board 1 space. Then the yellow player gets to move one of his discs on another board 2 spaces. Then finally the player who came in first, in this instance black, gets to move one disc on another board 3 spaces. So being near the top of the gallantry board gives you some flexibility, especially if you need to break a tie that you were not counting on. The other boards are about scoring points. So the fighting board and the jousting board work the same, and you actually play the same cards, the blue cards, for both of those boards. You just decide which board you're going to manipulate when you play the card. And for this one, if you're in first place on the board, you get one of the 3-point shields corresponding to that board. If you come in second place, you get 2 points, and assuming there is a third place, depending on the number of players, you will get 1 point. Whenever you get one of these little point shields, you keep it face down in front of you so the other players can't see what you scored. The education board is not so much about gaining points, it's about preventing yourself from losing points. If you come in, if you're in the front of the pack for the education board, nothing bad happens to you, but whoever is in dead last has to take a -3 victory point token, and whoever is next to dead last takes a -1 victory point token. Here I'll also mention that if you don't move from the starting spot, you will never be in contention to gain positive points, and you will always be considered dead last for boards like the education board. And if more than one person is tied for dead last and they have not even moved off to the beginning of the track, they will all receive the -3 points, in other words, the worst points, and there won't be a second place for -1 point. Now, the king board I mentioned only gets scored during the third and sixth round. That's because the king's board is not as competitive as the other ones. You are not trying to beat the other players there. You're just trying to get yourself as high as you possibly can on the board. If you get to the middle of the track, 6 spaces up, then at the end of the third, either the third or the sixth round, depending on when you're there, you'll score 6 points. But at the end of the third or sixth round, if you're able to get all the way to the top of the track, 12 spaces, you'll get 12 points instead. But at the end of the third round, you reset back to 0, so that can be pretty difficult. So you kind of need to focus on the king board and moving yourself up as much as possible. The dragon board only scores at the end of the game, and for that one, first place is 17 points. And this one will be hotly contested. And whenever you lap the track, by the way, you'll put one of your extra markers in the center to show that you've lapped the track, because this one will never reset. It just keeps going. Whoever's in second place gets 10 points, and if there is a third place, you get 4 points. The poverty track is like an extreme version of the education track in that you're trying to fend off negative points. In order to be a good knight, you need to help the poor people, and if you don't do that, you're going to be looked down upon by the people and by your kingdom and your king. So if you're in dead last on the poverty track, you take -10 points at the end of the game. Second to dead last takes -5 points. So you want to make sure you're kind of working on that track so that you don't get hit with the worst point, negative point chip in the game. And that's really how the game is going to proceed. You're going to keep playing all these different cards in order to move up on the tracks, knowing that that during certain rounds tracks will reset, having to accommodate that. Maybe working on the dragon in the poverty track if you can, if you want to. Maybe you ignore those and go for the other ones as heavy as you can. And maybe you try to go for the gallantry track to give you some flexibility and being able to move up one of your discs to break a tie. It's all about just drafting cards, moving up on those tracks, and trying to be the best squire you can in order to get King Arthur to notice you. Now, one thing I didn't go over in the overview were all the different variants that come with this game, and there are a lot of them because every single board that comes in the game is double-sided. And I just wanted to focus on the main game now. And there's also a smaller expansion board, so what I think I'm going to do is shoot a separate review going over all the different variants in the expansion board variant at the same time. So I just don't want to overload you with information on this one. And I tried some of the variants. I didn't try them enough to make a final opinion, but they're neat and they add some variety to the game if you think that you've played it too much, because the basic game here is very light and very simple, but that is not a bad thing. I think that is one of the strengths of the game, in fact. This is somewhere between, if I'm comparing card drafting games, this is somewhere between Sushi Go and Seven Wonders on the complexity scale. It's more meaty than a very simple card drafting game like Sushi Go, which is just cards, but not as intimidating for first-time players as Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders is a fairly simple game, but the first time you play it, you're like, what was all this? All these iconography and, you know, things doing different things, the interaction with the other players. This game is just sort of boils down card drafting to its essentials and then adds that cool board mechanic. And that's really where the flavor of the game comes in. Essentially, it's a tiebreaker. That's really what makes the game so interesting, because it really forces you to play your cards in a conservative way and at the right time in order to maximize their benefit. You may want to just jump right ahead on the gallantry track, but you're like, no, I'm not that far ahead already, which means that everyone else is going to want to jump up there, and they may land on top of me. The points totals, because cards only go from 1 to 5, the point totals are usually, or I should say the scoring totals are usually small enough, the girth or the, the breadth between them is usually small enough that it behooves you to wait, to just play a waiting game and see how long you can stretch it out before someone else jumps up on the gallantry track, and then you do so as well. So you might just do the king track because that's not a big deal, or maybe even the poverty or the dragon track. They have better names. Yeah, I think I don't know, it's like the charity track, and then I think the dragon track is the questing track. You might just go ahead on those tracks earlier in your round with the first few cards that you've drafted, and then wait to pounce at the end if you can. And turn order is all essential for this. It really is not a benefit to go first in this game. This is one of those games. Some games you definitely want to go first. This game, not so much. Instead, you want to wait and see what other players are doing and then react to what they're doing, and that's hard to do when you're the first player. I also like that this is one of the types of card drafting games, actually like Seven Wonders, where you dump your last card. So it's really important to draft cards in such a way that you always want to have 5 really good cards. You can't always have the perception that, oh, one of these cards it's fine if it sucks because I'm just going to dump it anyways. You want options. You want to get down to the last 2 cards in hand and your last card that you're going to play for the turn and be like, what can I do here? What is going to maximize my points the most this round? What is the best thing to do? There's also a lot of cost-benefit analysis in the game, especially when it comes in regards to the negative tokens. And also with the boards, the questing board and the charity board, and how they don't score until the 6th round. You need to make decisions as to what you're going to focus on here. If you try to be sort of a jack of all trades and just sort of hop from thing to thing and just do a little bit well, I don't think that's a winning strategy. I don't think you're going to succeed that way. You really need to decide what you're going to focus on. Whether you're going to go all out on the knight and jousting boards, whether you're going to try to get as much clout from the king board as possible, which is a lot of points, but also can be kind of, you know, it's dangerous. You don't know if you're going to have enough king cards come into your hand to get all the way to the 12 on the track, and was it really worth all that effort to get 6 points? That is super interesting to me. I love that a lot. And while I'm saying all these things, it's probably making the game sound more complicated than it is. It's so not. It's so simple, but because of that, it's accessible to a lot of people. But I think for gamerly gamers like myself, there's enough of an edge there to make it interesting. And then, of course, when you go and add the different variants, which I'll get to in a later review, that really opens the game up even more because now you have more variety and some of them a little more complicated than others. I like the whole gallantry track board because that one is not just giving you points, but it's giving you options. Again, you're having more options, just like if you hold on to 2 good cards at the end and choose from those. The gallantry board is like, okay, tiebreakers. This is where I have the opportunity. If one board went horribly wrong for me, I may be able to move up and make it work for me this round. Such a cool little concept there. But when it all boils down to is card drafting, which to me is one of my favorite mechanics. So if you like card drafting games, if you like sort of simple family weight games, but with an edge. This is going to be right up your alley. And oh man, I didn't even talk about the artwork. It's wonderful. I love the art in this game. It's from the same artist who did the art for Ghost Stories, which is also awesome. Very different artwork here, although it's still fantasy based. It's great. I love it, and it's such a welcoming and pleasing and charming game, both from the artwork and components and the theme and the actual gameplay. This game just works very, very well. I may see this showing up on my top 10 of 2014 list. I haven't compiled that yet, but it's a serious contender, and it's hard to get right now. You can get it from places like Board Game Bliss. I would urge you to check that site out because there's a lot of cool stuff there. It's a Canadian site, so you might have to pay a little extra in shipping, but it's not too bad if you're in the US. But it will be released if you don't mind waiting next year. I believe Yellow Games picked it up, the same company that does King of New York. Don't quote me on that. I heard that somewhere. It may or may not be true. Either way, it's such a cool game, and it's like this is Spiel des Jahres material right here because it's light, casual, fun, but just enough there to make it a really interesting game. And it will be available eventually someday. You might just have to be patient. But that's Medieval Academy from Blue Clocker Games. 2 big thumbs up.